Good afternoon and welcome to Volunteering Victoria's webinar series. Today's webinar is about building connections in the volunteering community, and I'm really excited to have Megan and Tracy here with me. Before I go on, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation from where I am presenting today, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders on the line with us today. I know we're not all in the same place today, so I'd encourage you to acknowledge the traditional custodians where you are located in the chat box if you feel like it. So I have just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our two guests. In the interest of all the other listeners, please keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar. You should have arrived on mute, but you should be able to check down the bottom by hovering your mouse over the screen. There's a public chat box which you can use to send messages or hellos to other participants. Please feel free to introduce yourself, and if you have a question, submit it through the chat or the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I'll be available to assist with any tech support needs through that chat box as well. After the webinar, this will be available online through Volunteering Victoria's website. So now, without further ado, let me introduce my two guests, Megan Cassar and Tracy O'Neill. So Megan leads the volunteer engagement team at Oxfam Australia. As a leader of volunteers for 9 years, Megan provides advice and guidance to managers of volunteers in recruiting, managing and exiting their volunteers, ensures all volunteers meet organisation and legislative compliance requirements, and helps set the strategic direction for volunteer engagement at Oxfam. Megan has volunteered her time to facilitate the Managers of Volunteers Network in Melbourne, an independent informal network of volunteer leaders in Melbourne's metro and outer suburbs. The Managers of Volunteers Network meets a few times each year for professional development. So Tracy O'Neill has been involved in volunteer engagement in Australia since 2001 and has managed programs in the charity, health, veterans and disability sectors. She is currently the Manager of Volunteer Services at Austin Health, one of the largest metropolitan health services in Victoria. Tracy is passionate about effective and sustainable volunteer engagement and advocates for a change in how we think about and champion our profession. She is passionate about developing advanced leadership training opportunities to retain exceptional members of the sector. Tracy believes that effective volunteer management is critical to effective, transformative and sustainable volunteer engagement. She'd love to see volunteer management become a chosen career path and see the role occupy senior leadership positions within organisations. Welcome, Megan and Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, welcome. So as we always get started with these webinars, I like to get our presenters to tell us a little bit about themselves and their role. So Megan, we'll start with you.
Sure thing. Thank you, Sarah. You've just done a very good job of introducing me, actually, but I'll expand on that. So so Megan Cassar, Volunteer Engagement Manager at Oxfam Australia. Also a mum of two, and I've been working in volunteer management for around 10 years. My current role at Oxfam is looking after volunteer engagement for all volunteers. We have volunteers all around Australia and ensuring best practice in the engagement of volunteers as well as interns, whilst at the same time ensuring compliance and with our policies, internal policies and legislation as well. While I have a small number of volunteers in my own team, I predominantly provide guidance to managers around our organisation for their recruitment and managers of volunteers and interns. It's great to be here. I see networking here as an imperative part of my role. So I, as well as doing, what's in my PD, I make a point of putting myself out into networks, connecting with others outside of my organisation. Because I find that I always find new ideas, different ways of thinking, and I bring that back into Oxfam.
Fantastic, Megan. Wonderful. Tracy.
Hi, I agree with Megan. I think you've done an amazing job of introducing me, Sarah. Thank you. So I have been working in volunteer engagement for almost 20 years now. and currently at Austin, I've been there for 8 years in my current role as the Manager of Volunteer Engagement for 3. As you said, I am super passionate about the elevation of our profession. It's probably the one thing that keeps that fire in my belly. And I'm really excited to speak on this topic today because it's actually the networks that I have created over the last 20 years that have helped me to develop my knowledge and my expertise and critical thinking skills that I have. You know, it's really down to the networks I've joined, the people that I've gotten to know, those I've managed to, you know, either witness or work alongside or, you know, debate with even. So I think it's a really, you know, networking is a really critical part of what we do. I have really tried to branch out over the last couple of years to support our profession more actively. So I'm currently a co-editor of the International E-Volunteerism Journal. I co-edit the Voices section, which brings together voices from all over the world talking on a lot of different topics around volunteer engagement. I'm a bit of an irregular blogger. It's something that I hope to, I guess, do a little bit more just to get my thoughts kind of out of my head, but also to start sharing more conversations with our colleagues around the world. That's me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tracy. And yeah, you were both picked on specially by me for this topic specifically because I think you both have done such a great job at building connections and fostering connections between and in our sector. So because I really think of volunteer managers kind of as heroes, I always like to hear everyone's, you know, origin story for how they found volunteer management, because as we know, there are so many varied pathways that are, you know, that bring people to our profession. So Tracy, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved in volunteer management, and then we'll get into the rest of the webinar?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's quite typical. I was, you know, dumped into it. I'm a social worker, I guess by background, and I worked for 5 years in different roles working with disadvantaged young people. And in the last organisation I worked for in that role, we were working with young people at risk of suicide and self-harm. We had a very small team of about 10 volunteers who came along to camps that we had about 3 or 4 times a year to support these young people. A colleague of mine really wasn't having much joy with the program. It wasn't something that she was interested in, and so I guess she, you know, didn't manage to prioritise it, and so it was basically handed to me and told I needed to do this on top of the caseload that I had, which I think is also really typical of people in our roles. We can wear multiple hats without any understanding of, I guess, the complexity of working with volunteers. So then, I guess after 5 years of working with disadvantaged young people experiencing trauma, I experienced a bit of burnout myself, and so decided that I had become really passionate about working with volunteers, and so then went to a job at the Starlight Children's Foundation as a volunteer coordinator in Western Australia, and I've never looked back.
Fantastic. Great origin story, and yes, I think very typical of our sector. Megan, how did you get involved?
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, I would say mine was a happy accident, but I could also say dumped, like Tracy. I was dumped into it, but it was a very happy accident. Prior to this life, actually, I was working in corporate law firms as an executive assistant for 10 years. Which wasn't the most rewarding work. I liked some parts of my role, like the organisational side of things, but I didn't really feel proud about my contribution to the world. So I wanted to find something and seek a career that could really make a difference. So I actually applied for a job. My first job in the not-for-profit sector, where I am now, was at Save the Children. I applied for a job as an administration officer. And on my first day there, this was in September 2010, I was advised that as part of my role, which was not in the PD, that I was responsible for recruiting and managing volunteers in a completely volunteer-run secondhand kids clothing shop. So I had never worked with volunteers before, and I'd never worked in retail. So that was a double whammy for me. But I was really thrown into the deep end, and obviously made a lot of mistakes, but also learned a lot of lessons. And in the end, I was an 8-month contract with Save the Children. And at the end of that contract, I'd enjoyed working with the volunteers so much that I felt confident enough to apply for a volunteer team leader role at Oxfam Australia. So that was 9 years ago and 2 babies later. And I've gone from leading volunteers in the support services team of the customer service area to managing volunteer and intern engagement for the entire organisation.
That's awesome. Thanks, Megan. So now wanted to talk a little bit about state and local networks, sort of geographical networks that you guys have been involved in. And I can see the old Volunteering Victoria logo. Some of you may recognise that. It's in the photo over there. Megan, did you want to tell us about some of the networks you've been involved in?
Yeah, sure. So actually on that photo there, the one on the left is me pictured with a bunch of ARMOV board members. So ARMOV, for those that don't know, is the Australasian Association for Managers of Volunteers. Just 2 years into my career at Oxfam, I applied to be a board member of ARMOV. And when I was appointed, I was delighted, if not a little shocked. And I was on the board from November 2013 for 2 years, right up until my first child was born, actually. So that was a great experience. I met some wonderful people from around Australia as well as New Zealand, and made some really great connections. It was probably a very, very good introduction to networking and the professionalisation of volunteer management. When I returned to work in around mid-2016, the then facilitator of Managers of Volunteers Network, also known as the MOV Network, who was Hazel Maynard at the time, was looking to hand over the reins to another member. So from January 2017, I managed and facilitated that network for 2 years, right up until the birth of my second child. At which point, Tracy, who I'd obviously met many times through different conferences and networks, kindly took the reins of managing the MOV network. And 18 months later, Hazel's actually kindly agreed to step back and assist. One thing that I've really learnt about networks is that it's only as good as the members. So it really takes more than just one person to manage and facilitate a network. It's not just one leader. All members are responsible for keeping it alive. And I think that's demonstrated by, Hazel handing it to me handing it to Tracy, and then Hazel taking it back. It's only as good as we keep it going. And of course, it goes without saying that throughout my entire volunteer management career, I've been a member of Volunteering Victoria, both through Oxfam, my organisation, and as well as an individual member. And again, met many, many people and made great connections through that as well.
Thanks, Megan. So it's a really good segue, actually, that you handed over to Tracy. And now, Tracy, do you want to talk about your state and local networks?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I've, as Megan's alluded to, I've kind of followed in her footsteps a little bit along the way. So I moved to Melbourne from Perth in 2006. I came over here as a volunteer myself and spent a month here volunteering at the Commonwealth Games and just fell in love with the city. And my very first introduction to, networks in Melbourne was the City Network, which, as Megan said, is now the MOV Network. And it was really, I had worked in this profession in Perth, but that network was really my first introduction to how supportive networks can and should be, how it can really support your own personal and professional development and can really help you get through the tough times that we experience in our roles. It's really challenging. Very often people in our organisations don't understand the complexities of our role and the type of expertise that we need in our jobs. And so it was those like-minded people in similar roles who really helped get me through some of the times where I could have otherwise just thrown up my hands and walked away. And so when Megan went on maternity leave, I was really happy to put my hand up to support the MOV network, because it was important to me that it continued, both personally, but also, you know, I see how much it contributes to our profession. And as I've said, I'm really passionate about elevating our profession. And as Megan said, I think one of the things I've learned from networks is that it takes people committed to our profession to step up, to make sure that we're all supported. And it often is a lot of the same people. I think we forget that working in the volunteer sector, we are an under-resourced, misunderstood, you know, profession, and it takes all of us really to come together and to drive what we do, and to drive, you know, making sure people have an understanding of our expertise and driving our own professional development. So it was really important to me to step up and be one of those people who make sure that I support our profession. And given, I guess, that belief, I actually put my hand up when Megan stepped down from ARMOV to take up one of the roles that were vacated when she went on maternity leave, to become a board member. And I guess this was really stemmed from my belief that as a profession, we really need to be connected, you know, locally, nationally and globally. And I felt that supporting our national, you know, professional association was a really key way that I could make sure that I was trying to do what I could to make sure we were all connected. You know, I came into this profession because I wanted to make a difference, and, you know, it's our volunteers who make a difference on the ground most often in our organisations, and this was one way that I really felt that I could make a difference to something I'm passionate about. And as well, I guess I've loved being a member of Volunteering Victoria for the last, you know, how many years is it? 14 years now. Really have appreciated the connections that I've made through all of the networking opportunities, and I've loved that Volunteering Victoria not only provides the special interest group, which I've been a member of the leadership special interest group for a number of years, but also the networking that is available, and you know, Volunteering Victoria has always made sure that we have time to network at all of our conferences and AGMs and, you know, professional development opportunities.
Fantastic. And yes, like, you know, like a lot of the networks, VV is as good as its, you know, really involved membership. So, you know, initiating this webinar series was another way to make sure our members got a chance to have their voices heard about, you know, issues that they see as really important in volunteer management. So besides kind of state geographical networks, there are other networks that exist in our profession. And so I thought I'd get you to talk a little bit about any sector or technology networks. So Tracy, do you want to chat first?
Absolutely, yeah. I guess this has been something I've been really passionate about, but it's also encouraged me to, I guess, explore networking even further. So there's probably two sector-specific networks that I have been most actively involved in my career. The first that I got involved with was the Palliative Care Victoria Managers and Volunteers Network. And this is facilitated by the peak body, Palliative Care Victoria, and has a really strong focus on the professional development of leaders of volunteers in palliative care. And I guess one of the things that I've really loved about that particular group is the focus that it's had, and that, you know, the facilitator from PCV has had on trying to ensure that leaders of volunteers are always seen as integral members of the multidisciplinary teams that work in palliative care. Palliative care was established by volunteers, and so that's been, you know, really heartening to work in a group that is so clearly dedicated to the professional development of leaders of volunteers, and they continue to do so. And then the photo there is of our Leaders of Health Volunteer Engagement network. So this was, and many people in Victoria will know of this group, but if you don't, The Love Network started in 2011 as a supportive network for leaders of volunteer engagement in the health sector in the central and northern regions of Victoria. So it was set up really because there was nothing else, and it was set up by Sharon Walsh from Bendigo Health and Karen Mitchell from Northeast, I'm going to get it wrong, Karen, Northeast Health Wangaratta. I think that's it. You know, recognising that there wasn't any other networks where they could seek support and some of the really specific challenges that come with working in health in regional areas. I developed really close relationships with both Sharon and Karen through the Palliative Care Managers of Volunteers Network. And so I guess wanting to develop my own personal networks in health, I'd just gotten into my role at Austin Health. I reached out to them both and asked if I could kind of tag along as someone who recognised I wasn't someone who worked in regional or rural Victoria, but would gain a lot from other people working in health. And I guess that group has become a real powerhouse in volunteer engagement. It's a really active group that has shown me just how much we can achieve if we come together and if we use our network. So this group, you know, we've been doing a benchmarking research project for the last 8 years where we can look at the growth or otherwise and the changes in volunteer engagement across our sector. That now has participants from right across the world. We have over 100 members now, which is amazing. The group received one of the ARMOS Leadership Awards a number of years ago. We received a $50,000 grant last year to develop a competency framework for leaders of volunteers in health. So it's we ran the inaugural Volunteer Engagement Health Sector Conference a number of years ago as well. So a group that really demonstrates through the commitment and the work, and I'm going to say volunteer work because all the members of this group do stuff over and above their paid work to make a significant difference in our profession. And I'm really, really proud to be part of that group. My involvement in these groups has helped me to grow immeasurably. And I think some of the really specific examples, and this often comes just from watching people and listening or brainstorming, you know, bringing a challenge to a group and brainstorming how you might actually address it. So some of the ways that I have really grown through these two groups in particular has been learning how to use my language effectively to advocate for volunteer engagement. I'm someone who's really passionate, and I think someone who might be really shy as well would probably, you know, find some similar opportunities with networks in that practicing things with our peers or recognising how we say particular things might come across to other people has helped me to really fine-tune the way I communicate with different groups. They've given me the tools to better demonstrate the impact of volunteering, and I think one of the biggest impacts of, you know, successful networks has been having people to help me celebrate my wins, whether they're tiny or large, and have also helped me through some of the most challenging moments in my career. I think we can get really disheartened in our profession, feeling that we're not getting anywhere. It can feel like a real struggle and like we're, a duck with our feet paddling 500 miles an hour under the water. But these groups have really helped me to recognise that every tiny win I have is helping me to get my program to where I would like to see it. It is helping me to better educate other people about our profession and the impact of volunteers. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to develop those skills without these particular groups.
Thanks, Tracy. That's awesome. Megan, did you want to talk about some of the groups that you've been involved with?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy, as well. That's I echo everything that you've just said. The group that I would like to just focus on in terms of, well, actually, you've mentioned it on the slide there, Sarah, is the Better Impact. It's the Victorian Better Impact Users Group. For anyone that doesn't know, Better Impact is a volunteer management software. They actually do much more than that these days. But we use it for our volunteer management software, and it's a very popular, very easy to use software. So Oxfam, we've had it for many, many years, and a few years into us actually bringing it into Oxfam, I started assisting the team at Better Impact with facilitating their users group. At last count, there was just over 160 members, which is quite a lot for just Victoria. So the users group focuses on bringing members together of the group to chat about the software. Usually Andy Fryer or Karen from Adelaide would come over to provide updates on the software. My role really was just setting up the meetings, finding venues, fielding queries, and of course having very important lunches with Andy and Karen when they were over. But yeah, there was always around 20 to 30 people that showed up to every meeting. We often ran overtime. We ran them sort of, about quarterly we were running them. And for me personally, I got to meet a lot of people, obviously through the network. People would come to me with questions about Better Impact. I became known as a Better Impact guru, which I did joke with Andy quite a number of times that I should be getting commission. But look, for me, it was a great use of my time. I would always come back to Oxfam with new ways or something different to try with the system that we're using and the way that we use the system, because it's so customizable. So, you're always learning different ways to use it. And an additional benefit for me, being a facilitator in that users group, was actually just before COVID happened. Better Impact had a conference in Victoria, which we were all able to attend in person. Can you imagine that? At the start of March. And they actually asked me to present at their conference, and it was the first time I'd ever presented at a conference. So that was a little bucket list tick for me, and hopefully the start of something else. So again, for me, like the networking, if I wasn't a part of that network, if I didn't put myself forward to facilitate that network, I wouldn't have then be presented with the opportunity to have presented at that conference. So yeah.
Fantastic. And yeah, I think it's these moments of little personal, professional development. I definitely cite my ability to facilitate a group meeting and my ability to talk in front of a room full of people from my early days actually volunteering. So, it's really sometimes very clear where you get confidence or the ability to try things that you might not have otherwise. So, just quickly, I guess, touching on a few of the international networks and resources. Tracy, you've become quite connected to various people and organisations internationally. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As I've mentioned, I am truly committed to the elevation of our profession, and I want myself and my peers to be seen as the experts we are, to be employed for our expertise, to have input into the strategic direction of our organisations, and to be supported by our governments as an important part of the social and economic fabric of our country. And I don't believe this can happen without us having a sense of identity as an international profession. We're not disconnected, or we shouldn't be disconnected from volunteer engagement right across the world. We have a lot to learn from people and to share with people in different countries. And so to do this, we really have to be connected globally with people doing our job across the world. And having these connections, I think, is so critical. And to start building my connections, I guess the very first thing that I did was make the most of the opportunities afforded to me by Volunteering Australia conferences. I made sure I introduced myself personally to every single international speaker that we had come out to Australia. Toby Johnson, Jane Cravens, Rob Jackson, and I followed up with them. I emailed them, I connected with them on LinkedIn and things. And I guess Rob Jackson in particular has become quite a bit of a mentor to me, to the point where I can have Zoom chats with him when I'm struggling, and he, someone who's really happy to share his advice and expertise and even just his listening ear to anyone in our sector. And I hope that many people listening know of Susan J. Ellis, who is arguably the grandmother of the profession of volunteer engagement. And before her death last year, Susan advocated for leaders of volunteers to use their voice. And Rob is one of her proteges, he and Andy in particular, along with a number of others. But Rob in particular encouraged me to start making these connections globally just by commenting on posts on social media as a way to, engage with my peers across the world. And this is literally where I started, mainly on LinkedIn, because people post, expert subject matter. And so it was a way to connect with people who had similar thoughts to me, who had different lived experiences, who could teach me something that I didn't know. And through connecting with people on Twitter and LinkedIn, I have further expanded my skills and knowledge. I've learned how to research my position, how to back up my beliefs about, volunteer engagement. I certainly don't agree with everyone. I think probably the most frightening moment of my entire career was writing an article for e-volunteerism where I actually had a complete opposite opinion to Rob Jackson, which petrified me because he's the chief editor of the journal. But it was only through, engaging in these conversations with experts across the world on social media that helped me to kind of gain that confidence and that ability to really back up my arguments. I've learned about really large global and policy issues that impact on volunteering and volunteer engagement. Like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, a lot of conversations recently about systemic racism and oppression that can be intrinsically embedded in our practices, how universal base income would help volunteering. That's been a conversation that's come up in, a global Facebook group that I started at the start of COVID. So that now has a few hundred members from right across the world, and we have a fortnightly Zoom chat at various different times in Australia so people from across the globe can connect. We've had people from Israel, the UK, New Zealand, Canada, the USA, and that has been incredible. And the other guest thing I wanted to touch on was the CVA, the Certification of Volunteer Administration, which is an international certification that is aimed at really designating or giving a designation to those who can demonstrate their expertise in our profession. And for me, obtaining my CVA, I was one of the first at the time, or at the time, yes. There's been 2 people previously, but only 2 of us currently, or when we sat it last year, had our CVA. Ange Sy from the YMCA and myself, and now Christine Stankowski from Lord Smith. And there's a whole bunch of other people who would like to get their CVA designation. For me, getting that certification was really a commitment to a global profession and being able to demonstrate my expertise alongside my peers across the world. So I guess for me, I would really encourage people to reach out to peers across the world in your sector, just in volunteerism in general, because it is an amazingly giving profession and you will learn so much.
Fantastic, Tracy. And that's great. So we might move on to kind of focusing a little bit about networking internally in your organisation. And I have the Love Benchmark survey, the most recent poster that's come out there, because one of the statistics that came through that we were actually talking about in a SIG meeting yesterday is that 93% of organisations identified the need for volunteers through networking with their staff. So through volunteer engagement managers or volunteer managers, networking with other organisational staff, that was a really, really common way for volunteers to identify the needs. So obviously networking both externally with other practitioners in your profession, but also networking internally at your organisation is important. So Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. Look, for me, networking internally is just as important, if not more important, as external networking. For me, it's always been about finding the champions of volunteering, the people within my organisation who I know really get volunteering and really understand the power of volunteers, and respect volunteers, and also the management, the responsibility of the management of volunteers. So these are the people in your organisation who recruit and manage volunteers well. They understand the importance of a positive experience, providing meaningful work to volunteers. A lot of people in my organisation, you know, who don't understand volunteers, don't necessarily realise that we've got a lot of skilled people in the world that are willing to just offer their services and really just want to help. So the champions are your go-tos for when it's time to advocate on volunteering. So one example of how I've used my internal networking to promote a project of mine was presenting an opportunity to two different staff members who I'd previously identified as champions to be managers of two interns from Career Trackers. I handpicked the staff members because I knew that they would respect and take seriously their role as intern managers. I wanted to ensure that the Career Tracker interns had a positive experience, but also that the managers, the staff members, had a positive experience, so that then they were able to tell other staff members about that to encourage others to take on the interns. So after that experience, both the interns enjoyed their experience. One of them even saying that the internship was one of the greatest opportunities and experiences that they had had, both professionally and personally. As a result, Oxfam Australia has continued its relationship with Career Trackers, and we're currently hosting a return intern right now who's working remotely. So that's a great success story there. I think over time I've learnt that in order to succeed with our internal networking is to be bold. We need to put ourselves outside of our comfort zone, make a point of speaking to people in our organisation that we wouldn't normally cross paths with, because it's often the people you don't expect who become your champions. So I think for me, that's probably one of my biggest lessons, was just put myself out there, and yeah, I'm always surprised with who ends up being my new best friend.
Absolutely. Tracy, do you want to talk to us a little bit about internal networking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Megan entirely. You have to find your champions. Excuse me. Don't waste, hang on a second. Sorry about that. Don't waste your energy trying to change the perspective of those who don't understand. I think we've got to show people the impact of volunteering through demonstrating impact and through working with those who support and value volunteering and volunteers. One of the things that I did was created a governance group who would support me to make the big decisions and to write to approve our strategic, our operational plan. And the people that I invited to be members of that group were both those people who understand and support volunteering, so people who I knew were already key champions in our organisation, but also a couple of people who I felt could have some influence if they understood more about, volunteer engagement and the potential impact of volunteering. And so, that was one of the key things that I did internally in terms of networking. I think it's really important to share information as broadly as you can. So send out information on the impact volunteers have had. Send a message to an entire team if they've had a volunteer or group of volunteers working with them. Send thank you notes. Send thank you notes to those who engage volunteers. CC their managers and directors. Make sure the message is getting out about the amazing impact the volunteers are having. Send your newsletter to as many people in your organisation as you can. You never know who will read it. I just started sending it to the people initially who engaged volunteers, thinking, oh, no one else really cares about it. But then I'd maybe send it out to a few more people who might be interested in one of the articles we had put in there. And we started getting feedback about how much people enjoyed reading it. And it just made me realise that while many people will possibly delete your email, you never know who's going to open it and who's going to read it and learn something and start watching out a little bit more for you and the volunteers in your organisation. And the other thing that I've done is linked with non-volunteer engagement colleagues on social media and LinkedIn, and posting regularly on those platforms, particularly Twitter and LinkedIn, about volunteer engagement at matters and issues, how volunteers can make a difference, something amazing that they've done within your organisation, and be seen in public as an expert, so that people in your organisation start to see that they have got someone influential and skilled working with them in their organisation who can lead and manage volunteer engagement, for the best possible outcome. So you want to make sure that you are being seen as an expert in as many platforms as you possibly can to try to leverage that.
Fantastic, Tracy. Absolutely. I think being viewed as an expert is really, really critical. So now thinking a little bit about mentoring, and some of you guys have kind of touched on it a little bit, and I've put some funnies up there, but Megan, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience being a mentor or being mentored in the sector?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. So I've actually, this is my first year, I signed up to be a mentor through Volunteering Victoria. So I did have an informal mentoring relationship many years ago where I was the mentee, but it was very, very informal. This is the first structured mentoring program that I've been a part of. And what a year to start! In the time since in the time since the mentoring relationship started, we've been told to work from home. We've gone into lockdown. We came out of lockdown. We went back into lockdown. Both myself and the mentee have had significant changes to our organisations, including the suspension of most volunteering roles. The mentee's priorities in their position changes frequently, which has made keeping on track with goals we set at the start of the year quite challenging. And obviously we've never actually met in person. So in saying all of that though, it's definitely enabled us to work in a way we would otherwise have not attempted. We're obviously completely online. We're facing a new challenge every time we meet. And for me personally, it's been a great learning curve, which it's encouraging me to sign up again, because I'd like to see whether it's a different experience in a non-COVID world, whether it, being in person or online actually makes a difference to that relationship. But it's definitely also allowed me to learn a lot about myself and my leadership skills, and has enabled me to practice my leadership skills as well. So, so far so good.
Fantastic. Tracy, did you want to talk about some of your mentoring experiences?
Yeah, I've been a mentor through the Volunteering Victoria program a number of times, and I have been in awe of the people I've met. And I think my main lesson from mentoring has been that we are all experts. We all have something to bring to the table. And while I may have, strengths that I have developed and honed over a couple of decades, the people I mentored through the Volunteering Victoria program have taught me so many things. Patience, tenacity, how to play the long game to enact change. They've shown me that my way isn't the only way, and they've challenged me to look for collaborative solutions instead of giving advice. So, the program and the way it's set up to really teach us how to be coaches rather than advice givers has been, it's been really powerful. We've all got something to contribute, and I think it is a really great program both for mentors and mentees. And I'm really excited to say that, creating these global networks that I have across the world has led me to recently being asked to mentor a colleague in the USA who I connected with. And I only connected with her through a comment made on Facebook, and we had a couple of comments on Facebook She then reached out on Messenger, and we had a little bit of a chat, and we organised a Zoom conversation, and realised that we are very passionate about some of the same things in our profession. And it really showed me that the world is a small place, and there are a lot of places where we can learn and develop.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think in some ways the COVID has really shown us that the world is actually a smaller place than we might have realised. So
Definitely.
Talking a little bit about platforms, how you might have, been connecting with people in the past, in the area of COVID. Megan, did you want to talk to us about how you found it useful to form some of these connections, aside from maybe some of the formal networks that we've talked about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for me, pre-COVID, I would have said that my favourite platform to meet people is through attending networks and conferences. So networking obviously is great for meeting people that are based locally. So therefore it's easy to arrange to meet up outside of that network. And obviously they're in the same time zone. So that always helps. And conferences, on the other hand, they provide such a wide variety of people who come from all walks of life and all locations. So conferences, I find, is often where I get most inspired after attending a conference and getting to know other passionate leaders of volunteers. So for me, I need to meet people face to face to form a connection. Face to face doesn't necessarily mean in person. It can be face to screen. So generally I'm actually quite terrible at remembering names and faces. So I need to meet someone at least 3 times in person before I can connect the two without assistance. But thanks to COVID, online networking has become imperative, and with everyone's name listed underneath their faces, it makes remembering and getting to know people very easily. These days, thanks to COVID and to Tracy for creating a volunteer management Facebook group, there's a global volunteering chat. We've just had our 7th one, where leaders of volunteers from around the world are getting together to support each other, share ideas on and continuous engagement with volunteers when many volunteer programs have been suspended. And obviously this is done all online. There's, it ranges from, 10 to 30 people in attendance. So it's not huge numbers, but it's certainly a nice amount where I'm actually meeting new people and getting to know people. In fact, I would say that I connect quicker when I meet people via video conference. I think it's because when, you're just in your own home, you haven't got the distractions of other people joining into the conversation. It's, only one person can really talk at the time at once. So it allows for that conversation to be really quite deep and meaningful. Yeah.
Fantastic. Tracy, what has been your experience in the best platforms for connecting with people? Obviously, you've had a bit of success, as you've mentioned, with some of the online platforms.
Yeah, and I think ditto to Megan. I think ordinarily network meetings and conferences certainly are the places that I love the most for the networking opportunities, because you get that little bit of time with people. I do love social media though, and it kind of varies, or I go through phases which ones I engage on. I go in and out of Twitter. I think Twitter's been a great place. There used to be a Thoughtful Thursday for leaders of volunteers, which was a global chat on a Thursday, but it kind of didn't take off, or it phased down and it didn't take off again. But on Twitter, I could follow a conference that was happening overseas, and I could go in and engage in conversations with participants of conferences, which is always amazing. There's lots of ways to share kind of funny in-sector memes and jokes, and you certainly discover who the movers and shakers are in other countries and who you might want to reach out to make further connections. And I also love LinkedIn. I think I mentioned this before, being able to engage in conversations about areas of our expertise written by colleagues from across the world, or we can also team up to support alternative perspectives to people outside our sector who are demonstrating that they don't understand volunteer engagement or volunteerism or the impact of volunteers. And so it can be a really helpful way of actually demonstrating our strength and expertise as a sector in that capacity. And yeah, Facebook's been amazing and I guess has helped to lead to many friendships outside of kind of professional connections as well. And that Facebook group has been fantastic, and our opportunities to chat every couple of weeks.
Fantastic. So I'm aware that we're getting close to finishing time. So we will finish up with the planned questions we have pretty soon and give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions that you have of Megan and Tracy. But it's worth noting that when we were planning this webinar, we were really in the thick of conversations and a lot of the global movements that were surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement. And so we, in planning this conversation, had some real conversations about how networking or connecting with people in the sector might have expanded cultural and diversity perspectives. And Tracy, I wondered if you were happy to share with us some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my involvement in the Love Network, I guess, was my first experience with really expanding my perception of cultural diversity. And that was around the difference in experience and lived experience of people who live and work in rural and remote areas, and also the few people that we had on that group who were from overseas. Our sector's a little more diverse in the USA and Canada, so connecting with colleagues over there has allowed me not only to expand my knowledge, but also to have a better understanding of lived experience. And I guess it's through the safety of networks. You know, you establish connections and trust in the relationships you build, and it does make it easier to really understand our inherent biases and to come to challenge the beliefs that we've had. So I guess one really simple example was a long-held belief that used to be touted in our profession, and I just kind of picked it up and ran with it, was that members of minority groups often preferred to volunteer with organisations, I guess, who support those particular minority groups. So, you know, an LGBTIQ, person might actually support an LGBTIQ organisation. And so, you know, someone from a local Somalian community from where I live, we have quite a large Somalian community, may be more likely to volunteer in a community organisation that serves the Somalian community. You know, so they're changing the lives for themselves and others with a similar lived experience. And it was only through a networking meeting with someone I've known for years through the City Network who challenged and debunked this, who works for an LGBTIQ organisation and said that as more organisations have become more inclusive, her organisation has struggled to recruit volunteers with a lived experience because they're feeling safer to volunteer elsewhere. I guess I really forced myself to reflect on this comment and the fact that I had let this belief drive some of the work that I do, the way I recruit people, the way I target people that I recruit. And it's really forced me to think about things differently and to recruit differently, because we want to be an inclusive organisation. We want to reach out to anyone who wants to volunteer with us. And so, you know, this conversation changed me for the good. And if it wasn't for the fact that it was a conversation that was held in a network where people trust each other and gotten to know each other over a really long time, that I would have had that belief challenged, and that I would have actually looked to change my practice.
Yeah, fantastic. It's sometimes, you know, you have a pivotal conversation and that thing really sticks with you and can really influence your practice, into the future. Now, in the interest of time, please do pop into the chat box with questions, but I'm aware that everyone's on a tight time frame at the moment. So we might just ask Megan and Tracy for, I guess, their final thoughts, and then we'll go to any questions that any of you on the line have. So Megan, did you want to just give us any final thoughts on what the value of building connections in the sector and networking has meant to you in terms of your volunteer involvement?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sarah. Look, I guess I'd probably like to finish just to say what my biggest lesson has been. So with networking, for me, it's been about trusting myself, trusting that what I have to contribute to the sector through my own experience is valuable and beneficial. Putting myself forward as a leader and facilitator of several different networks. It's improved my self-confidence and my public speaking skills. I'm quite a nervous public speaker, so sort of putting myself into those positions has really enabled me to push through those fears. Having opportunities to talk about my experience to help others, such as through this webinar, is great for me personally and allows me to grow as a person and a leader in my sector. And just being able to, and knowing, I suppose, that my experience, you know, I sound like a really old person when I say that because I've been doing it for so long, but just being able to help other people, you know, tell them where I've gone wrong, point them in, you know, a different direction. The mentoring is obviously a part of that. It, you know, as much as it's helping other people, it really makes me feel good about myself. I mean, they say that volunteering is such a selfless thing, but, you know, I volunteer for PANDA, Perinatal Anxiety Depression Australia, and I get more out of it than, you know, I mean, I'm sure I help others as well, which I hope I do, but I do it really for myself because it makes me feel good. And that's the same in terms of networking and learning from others and helping others.
Fantastic, Megan. Those are some amazing kind of lessons and thoughts to sum up. Tracy, did you want to give us some final thoughts? And then we do have a couple of questions.
Yeah, and I think, I guess I feel like I've answered this through most of it, so I won't waste too much time. But I guess to answer Tracy's question in the chat box, how do you keep your passion going? I guess this is the final message that I'd like to share, and that is prioritise networking. You know, as much as we have things that we need to do in our day-to-day job, it wasn't until I blocked out time to do networking, whether it's to attend a meeting that I refused to cancel because, you know, it used to be that it was network meetings were the first thing I would let go because it wasn't an internal, you know, priority. Block out time to speak to your peers. For me, my passion keeps going because I remain connected with people who have the same passion. It's really hard to keep that fire in your belly when you're struggling with all the challenges of your role. So I guess the final thing I would like to say is make sure that you carve out time to network in whatever way that might be for you, whether that's through social media or attending meetings or making sure you have phone contact with, you know, with people that you connect with at a really personal and deep level that you've met in the sector. I'm happy to put my hand up to be one of those people. I love chatting with people. It is the thing that keeps the fire in my belly and keeps me really pushing the elevation of our profession.
Fantastic, Tracy. That's such a great kind of note to finish up on. Megan, did you have any further thoughts about how you keep your passion going? Burnout is such a critical issue. So thank you, Tracy, for raising that question in the chat box.
Yeah, burnout is a huge issue. And I personally think that burnout comes from isolating yourself. So really feeling like there's no escape, basically. So that's why networking is so important. Being able to talk to people who get what you do, who understand the challenges, and who really can support you. And whether that's by giving advice or actually just listening, you know, or buying you a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, it's really important. It's, you know, we're human beings. We need that connection. It's unnatural to manage things on our own. It takes a village. So that's, for me, my passion is the people, constantly meeting people and building those networks, so that when things are getting tough and I feel like I'm at burnout point, I can reach out to those people that I know that get me and get what I do, and that's what keeps me going.
Fantastic. So we are bang on 3. So thank you both, Megan and Tracy, for your insights today. I think you are both incredible advocates for our sector, and incredible advocates to show the power of connection. So thank you all for attending today. Just one very, very quick VV note. The state awards are focused on COVID this year. So please, 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 if you haven't had a think about them, that is another way to feel connected and showcase all the fantastic work that everybody has been doing behind the scenes. So they close the 20th of September. So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon. And thanks again to our superb panelists for their wonderful wisdom today. See you later.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
Bye.
you.